Hi, and welcome to this brief screencast explaining how to use Azure API Management Service Management API. So let me go back to the browser. Note that I'm in the Azure API Management Publisher portal on the security page on the API Management REST API tab. First thing you need to do in order to use the API is to enable it. By default, it is disabled, so you have to opt in by checking the checkbox. After you check the checkbox, we're going to generate an identifier for you to access the API and two keys, primary and secondary. Those keys are equivalent and can be used interchangeably, and the reason we provide two keys instead of one is so that you can rotate keys easily. We also provide a URL to the management API, and it is essentially the management API endpoint for your specific tenant. And as you can see, it has tenant name in the URL. In my case, it's Epiphany. We also provide a UI here so that you can generate a token, expiring it at some point in the future using one of the two keys. And after you generate it, you can easily copy it into either your code or into your tool of choice to make calls to the management API. One other noteworthy thing here is the link to actual documentation for the API. So as you can see from the documentation, we provide management operations on a majority of entities in the system which are related to API management. Prerequisite section here is quite important. It sort of discusses certain things that you need to do to be able to successfully call any of the methods of the API. It walks you through enabling the API, explaining what the default media type is, and then how to authenticate with the API, and the fact that you need to provide version parameter. And you can, as you can see here, you can actually either programmatically generate access token or through the UI that I showed you. And this section, programmatically create an access token section, is actually showing you a snippet of code which does programmatically create an access token, so you can use that if you need to. So let's go back and take a look at the instance here. So as you can see, I have just one API, which is called Echo API, and just two products, Starter and Unlimited. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to manipulate, manage essentially this API management instance through the API. And I will, create product and create an API and create operations and connect those things together, and then essentially will programmatically do things that before we were able to do only through the UX. So let me bring up a tool. This is essentially a generic client for making HTTP requests to endpoints. So as you can see here, at the top you have a URL that you're calling. This section here allows you to set headers and various other things like body parameters for the request. This section in the middle shows you actual request that is going to be sent based on the parameters entered above. And of course, this bottom section will show the response. So I pre-created and sort of catalog here some of the requests that I will be making so that we can do it quickly. So I have an API, calculator API. You're probably familiar with it if you watched any of the other videos. It's sort of the API that we commonly use to demonstrate API management. So as you can see, I'm trying to add two numbers, A and B, 99 and 1. And if I make a call, you're going to see that I'm going to get a result, which is basically 100, which is what we need to have, obviously, based on the input. And you can see two things here, that the parameters are accepted through query parameters A and B, and then the result is XML, and you don't have to provide any content except header here, and regardless of what you provide, we're always going to get XML. So I'm going to actually onboard this calculator API into API management instance I just showed you, and make it available for developers to sign up and use, changing two things. First off, I'm going to change parameters from query to path here. In the sort of in how the API is getting invoked. So I'm going to basically change the URL signature of this API, and also I'm going to enable JSON responses in addition to XML based on accept header. So let's start doing this. So by the way, this is I can actually go and check what APIs I have, and right now in the system, as you can see, that I have only one API, Echo API, as I showed you, right? So just to demonstrate that I'm talking to the same API management tenant that I just showed you. So let's start with creating an API. So let's take a look here. So first off, note two things: that you have to provide as a prerequisite for every request an API version, and I parameterized it within this tool. But you can see that API version parameter is required here. We also need to provide an authorization header, and it also parameterized in my case. And that authorization header allows us to authenticate with an API. So it contains a token, very identical, obviously different value, but identical to the one that I showed you in the publisher portal just a few minutes ago. So for this particular call, essentially what we do is we have an APIs collection, which essentially lists all the APIs available in this tenant. So now I'm actually adding a new API, and I assign it an identifier of calc. So this could be any random string of numbers and letters. It doesn't really matter what it is. I'm just using calc because it's very natural and it's easy to understand. But again, this is not the name of the API. This is the ID of the API. So think about the pattern as collection/ID of an individual item in the collection. Okay, and then I'm providing information about the API I want to create through a body, which is specified in JSON format. And as you can see, I'm providing service URL, path, supported protocols for the API. I provide its name and description. So all these things that you used to provide through the API, through the UI, we're providing here as a JSON payload. So let's make a call and see if we are successful. Yes, we are. So you see that we get 201 successful status code, which is, basically says that the API is created. And we can actually go and confirm this by invoking this get APIs, right? Again, we're just doing get on the APIs collection here. You can look at the URL. And if we do that, you can see that now I actually have an extra API here with the ID of calc, right? Which is exactly what I wanted to create. And just to again emphasize that calc here is an identifier, not the name, right? It helps. I mean, it happens to coincide or match the path, but these are completely different things. And as you can see in this API that was created by default when the instance was created, you can see that its ID is basically a GUID, right? So instead of GUID, you can use any arbitrary string of characters. Great. So we've got an API at this point. So at this point, we want to basically assign a policy to this thing because when I showed you the original API, I mentioned that I would like to make sure that this API will be able to actually return JSON or XML based on the accept header. And essentially here, I'm attaching policy to this API. And you can see that what I'm doing is I'm doing a put on a policy within the API, within ID calc, within the APIs collection. And I'm essentially supplying a policy document very similar to the one that you would see, in fact, identical to the one that you would supply in the UX. One thing to note here that in addition to authorization header that has to be always present, similar to API version, content type here is not application JSON, but rather a custom header XML-based, custom XML-based content type, specifically sort of specifying that this is in fact API management policy. So let's invoke this operation. It is successful. So at this point we have actually an API which has a policy associated with that. Let's add an operation to this API. So, every API in API management can have one or more operations, and so let's create one. Again, here, as you can see, we are doing put on API's collection. Within that collection, we're choosing the API with an ID calc, and then we are creating an operation with an ID sum under its operations collection. Again, very regular structure of the API: collection ID, and then within that there is another collection and another ID, right? So very simple to deduce, and pretty much all the entities within this API work similar way. So as soon as you get the hang of it, it will be very easy for you to navigate, and you won't need to actually go in and check on documentation. So here, exactly the same motion. We are actually creating an operation. We providing a body which describes that operation here. And you can see that we have a name for this operation as description, method, the template, and then we describe each of the template parameters, and then even response, right? So now, interesting thing here is you can see that URL template specifies A and B as path parameters rather than query parameters, and that's great. That's what I want it to be, right? And so let's go and create it. There we go. So now we have actually an API with a policy and then an operation on this API. Of course, if we leave things as is, right? What's going to happen is when you call the API, it's not going to it's going to try to forward to the backend using path parameters versus query parameters, and that of course will cause failure. So we actually need to add a rewrite policy to that operation to make sure that we're converting the request to a proper form that is expected by the backend service. In addition to that, I'm also setting caching, obviously, because it's a very cacheable API. So I added caching here as well. So this is our rewrite statement, and you can see cache as well. Again, we are assigning policy to an operation with an ID sum to an API with an ID calc. Very understandable. And again, if you look at the type, it is type of policy in API management. So let's go and invoke that. It's set. So at this point we have API and operation, and both of them have policies assigned to it. As you know, for APIs to be accessible to end users, they have to be published as part of the product. So in this case, I create a special product. I call it special, and again, very similar structure of URL. So I'm doing a put on products collection, and creating a new product with an ID special. Again, it's not the name, it's the ID. I'm providing a body which describes the product, right? Over here, very short description. And let me execute this operation. Great, now we have a product. So, of course, this product doesn't have any APIs yet, so let's assign calc API to that product. So again, what I'm doing here, I'm doing a put on the products collection for the specific entity with an ID special, and in its APIs collection, I associate sort of a calc API with the ID calc to the APIs collection of this product. So let me do that. Excellent. So at this point, we've got a product, a special product, and it has associated API, which we just created. Let's take a look. Let's retrieve all the products and see it. Okay, so here we have at the top special product, and if you look at this, you can see that the state of it is not published. We need to actually publish the product first before it can be used. So let's go and publish the product. So here I'm doing a patch because I'm basically modifying the status of this product. That we have, assigned ID of special in the products collection. So let's do that. Let's patch it to published. Let's check if we were successful. Okay, you see here we've got state published, so everything is good. So at this point, what we have is we have created an API and an operation assigned policies to both. Then we created a product and associated the API with the product and then published the product. So at this point, we are actually good to go. So in fact, we have everything ready to be able to actually make calls to the calculator API through API management. Just to verify, let's go and look at our, let's refresh here and see what we can see in the publisher portal. Well, not surprisingly, we actually have a calculator API. We also have a special product, and if we dive into that product, we see that it's published and it has a calculator API associated with that. If we go further and investigate, calculator API, we can see that we have add to numbers operation, and we can, look at that operation. We can see that rewrite policy has been applied, and we've got parameters with nice descriptions and values and all that stuff. So, and if we go into the policies section in the policy editor and choose a calculator API, we will see that we have policy assigned to it, and if we go to the operation level, we can see that we have rewrite and cache assigned. So everything that we used to do in the UX, we actually did through the API. So at this point, we can actually go ahead and start calling it. But before we do, we actually need to get a subscription key for this new product, since it's newly created. New keys were generated. I'm sorry, pressed wrong menu item. So let's go into profile. Let's take a look at my subscription to special product. Here are my keys. So let me grab it. Okay. Go back to my HTTP client. Here I have operations set up to actually call the API through call calculator API through API management. So as you can see, this is my tenant. This is my base URL for my API management tenant. I assigned calc suffix for this API, and I'm calling add operation on this, adding 99 plus 1. And as you can see, I need to provide subscription key. So let me go and enter that. So here's subscription key. I parameterized them for convenience because they're used in multiple places. So let's go back a little bit here. And let's make a call and see what happens. Now, as you can see in headers, I'm actually asking for XML, so that's what I should receive. Excellent. Here we go. Result is 100. And if we change values here, let's say we're going to say 99 plus 2. Obviously it's 101, so it's all working fine. And let's go now and ask for the same, result, 99 plus 1, but in JSON format, and see if the policy will apply. Let's do that. Yep, here is 100, and then, if we modify the input, let's say 2 here, make a call, it's 101. So everything is working great. So in a matter of a few minutes, we actually were able to programmatically manage APIs and products within API management. As I mentioned before, there's more capabilities here. We can create users, we can create groups, we can assign users to groups, we can actually retrieve report data. Let me show you that if I can find it here. For instance, if I want to get stats, and here I'm basically getting information from the API. You have to provide basically a query expression here, and you can read about it in documentation. So let's make a call here. Okay, so you can see that you can get information back, reports, essentially pretty much the same reports you will see in the UX through API. You can see that you can do it in text CSV, comma delimited format, which is very nice because you can actually put it in something like Excel and do further analysis or pivots on that. Or you can do the same thing with if you want to programmatically access the same data, you can actually do it, receive the same data, the same report in JSON format. Here we go. Okay, so that wraps up my demonstration of API management, service management API. Let me go to the PowerPoint here, switch to the last slide. Here's some information for you. You can follow and direct questions either to me directly or Azure API Management Twitter account or email. And of course, we are at azuremicrosoft.com APIM. So hope to hear from you. And thank you very much for being part of this screencast. Thank you.